We're talking about a kind of a big major topic today, anxiety and autistic people. More and more people involved in the field are just saying, we just didn't fully appreciate just how big an issue anxiety is for autistic people. Well, see, I think that two of the, this anxiety is a whole complex territory as well, and at least two of the kind of broad underlying themes that are often found once you start looking closer at anxiety are uncertainty and unsafety.
Yeah.
So, if you feel very uncertain a lot of the time about a lot of things about the world, then you're going to feel anxious a lot of the time, just feeling the world's a very uncertain place without being able to name that. It is.
And it's when that sense of not being sure-footed, if you like, is something that all human beings are familiar with. It's what we're talking about, the accumulation of it as to when it becomes intolerable.
I love your phrase of not feeling sure-footed. I think that's very much captures it for me, is that you're always feeling then kind of just not steady and stable in the environment, or most of the time. We're talking about a kind of a big major topic today, anxiety and autistic people. I mean, all the topics we talk about are big and major and important, or we wouldn't be talking about them. But there is something huge about anxiety and autistic people. More and more people are saying that. More and more autistic people, more and more writers, more and more people involved in the field are just saying, we just didn't fully appreciate just how big an issue anxiety is for autistic people. And I think it's my understanding of it. I thought, as a kind of a starting point, was that I think I remember meeting this issue before in clients, and maybe some of them are autistic, but this is outside of working with autistic clients. I remember it anyway. I also remember realizing it in my own experience, and that is very much to do with being autistic, and that is that there are people who are always anxious since I don't know if it's quite the moment they're born, but certainly as far as they can remember, and possibly as far as they could be aware of any feelings. In other words, anxiety has just been pervasive for them. And the problem with that is that you don't know what it is, because if something's always there, you can't really name it. It's like asking a fish what they think about water, and they say, what's water, and I've had that experience. Like many years ago, I had my first experience of that with a client, and he's saying, well, do you feel depression? Do you feel anxious? Do you feel, tell me about your mood and, things you struggle with. And them saying, well, I'm not anxious anyway. And they were visibly anxious, edgy and uncomfortable and looking worried and lots of things. And so, I definitely think that that's one of the things that we've realized now about growing up neurodivergent and not knowing it, autistic specifically in this case, is that for an awful lot of people, there's just from as early as they could feel it, they have felt anxious in the world, and in a sense haven't known it until they get to the point of talking it out with somebody. So I do think it's a very key issue, very key issue.
And when it gets quite severe, let's say, use that word, often it becomes obvious because they're not doing the things. I'm not going out, or I'm coming home early, or I'm finding myself not able to go to work.
And that can also be sometimes tied in with exhaustion, and, as they say, the spoons and all of that. But you're absolutely right. Some of it is very much around that, what anxiety does, because anxiety is an emotional response and a physiological response whose evolved purpose is to tell us maybe there's some danger and threat there that you need to avoid. So what it tends to create is avoidance and a sense of being, resisting and pulling away from things. And, in a way, I think for a lot of autistic people growing up and in adulthood, it's interesting that you say the things, because it's quite hard sometimes to even identify what things to pull away from. Some maybe might clearly cause anxiety, but it's almost like it's everything. It's just the world. It's just living in the world. And I'm partly speaking personally here. Like, I think looking back looking back for me, that makes a lot of sense, you know, that it was just a whole sense of being in the world was quite a lot of the time just scary.
Without being able to pinpoint it further, you mean?
Yeah. Sometimes being able to pinpoint it, like anyone, like most people can. I mean, the whole question of alexithymia and finding it difficult to identify feelings and so on is another layer. But yeah, sometimes autistic people, and sometimes I could say, oh, definitely today I'm anxious about this, you know, an exam or something. But a lot of the time it was this puzzle. It's like, well, today's an ordinary day as far as everyone else is concerned. And I certainly couldn't say that there's something that anyone else would take seriously if I told them that's in my day. Oh, you must be anxious about that. No, it's just like, what? Why am I anxious?
Yeah, and the cause and effect is always not easy to find, is it? Because it may be as well an accumulation of something, not necessarily a specific event.
Well, see, I think that two of the, you know, this anxiety is a whole complex territory as well. And at least two of the kind of broad underlying themes that are often found once you start looking closer at anxiety are uncertainty and unsafety.
Yeah.
So, you know, if you feel very uncertain a lot of the time about a lot of things about the world, then you're going to feel anxious a lot of the time, more so around certain things. But also that kind of, continual micro-traumatisation that we're also becoming more and more aware of around growing up autistic means that you also, you're being, you know, you're gradually building up a kind of a complex post-traumatic stress, and you're feeling, you know, unsafe in the world, and both of those are, you know, key underlying predictors of and causes of being anxious. And
yeah, and it's almost like a closed down response in a way, isn't it? It's like with food intolerances. If you don't know what it is, you just stop everything. You know.
Yeah.
And build it back in gradually to try and identify it.
Yeah, definitely. And again, therefore, while some people can say this is what I'm anxious about, a lot of the time I think we can't. I mean, I work like yourself with adults, but I mean, I think that, but in doing so, we of course go back through the story, and we're very interested in people's earlier experiences. And some therapists are working, you know, with autistic people who are currently children or adolescents. But school is a classic example, I think. You know, so-called school refusal, you know, school anxiety. You know, like what are you anxious about? You know, a lot of children can't say. Sometimes they can say the teacher is horrible, and sometimes even everyone agrees they're horrible. And it's and you know, a known source or a specific source, or yes, like we've a test tomorrow or whatever. But a lot of the time, I think autistic children can't clearly pinpoint or articulate.
It might be that there's might not be anything specific about the school. It might be that there are very, very challenging experiences in their life at that time, and that the source of the pushing for them to just get over it might be coming from the school. And so they're maybe avoiding that pressurized dismissal and reading of them, you know, like the source of the person trying to just push me into forgetting about it or just pretending it doesn't exist. The source of that could be the school, potentially. You know,
certainly amongst others. Certainly, I do think that is also part of the mix that we meet with adult clients, is that, you know, not only are they surrounded by water because they always feel anxious, but also they're frequently told there isn't any water. And then you couldn't be anxious because what would you have to be anxious about, you know? But like, you know, lots of aspects of life, and, you know, school is a good example as any, but you know, it's not the only example. It's just such a big part of our developmental history, and big part of what can be difficult for autistic people. Not every aspect of school or anything like that, and some autistic people love certain aspects of school. But again, there can be a lot of uncertainty. There can be plenty of certainty as well. But autistic children and adolescents often find that, a place like school where there's a lot going on and information is being moved around very fast, and it's not just about what's going on in the school academically, but it's about like who's friends with who and who's not friends with who, and a million other things like that. It's just compared to now, home obviously can be uncertain depending on the state of your home, but for a lot of autistic children, I think, compared to their own room at home, schools full of uncertainty that they wouldn't be able to pinpoint. If you ask them, they wouldn't say, well, it's the uncertainty, that's why I'm anxious. I think that's one aspect that I certainly would be exploring with clients, also in the present, but in doing that developmental work, the growing up, just feeling the world's a very uncertain place without being able to name that. It is.
And it's when that sense of not being sure-footed, if you like, is something that all human beings are familiar with. It's what we're talking about, the accumulation of it as to when it becomes intolerable.
Yes. Yeah. Like being in a foreign country all the time, that in a foreign culture, that's the parallel we often use. We've often used it here in our chats, and often use it with clients. It's like, if you go on an exchange trip or an Erasmus year in college or something, it's not quite the same as going on holidays, but if you're actually, if you're abroad on business, or you are working away somewhere else, or you emigrate, then we all know that feeling of, as you say, lack of sure-footedness and lots of uncertainty. And of course, it provokes anxiety and stress as well, by the way. That's the other kind of confusion in people's minds until you clarify it a bit further, is that, it can also just be stressful, even when you're not feeling anxious in the sense of fearful. It's just you're processing a huge amount. And that's just, again, exhausting, as you said. But
and I suppose...
sure-footed, not sure-footed, great phrase,
And like you say, with that difference, with being in that different and challengingly different environment, if your attempts to make sense of it and to interact with it and it works out well, then the anxiety can reduce. If nothing's working, it's still not making sense, or the ways that you're interacting with that new environmental situation is not working, then that can be very anxiety provoking, because it's like, how can I solve this? I'm starting to feel a bit desperate.
Yeah. And how do people solve it when they solve it, and often, just through help from other people. And it's exactly the point that Rachel is making there in the chat, is saying it may be difficult to ask for and accept help because being singled out may bring its own stresses. And I think that's a really good point, because, that's in a sense the next level of the problem, is like you're feeling anxious and maybe you feel other people aren't, and maybe some are, but a lot maybe aren't the way you do. And therefore, the whole notion of drawing attention to yourself, it only makes it worse. And if you risk it, yes, you may have a bad experience, which brings me back to the micro-trauma piece. I think that's the other part, is that apart from just general uncertainty, and as I say, I love your phrase of not feeling sure-footed. I think that's very much captures it for me, is that you're always feeling then kind of just not steady and stable in the environment, or most of the time. But then there's lots of more specific traumas, micro-traumas and not so micro-traumas that
and not just all imagined. They could be based on past experience. It just compounds, doesn't it?
Yeah, totally. Oh no, absolutely. Like, being, avoiding and then feeling excluded and being excluded because because you're not behaving the same as other people are, and because you're a bit standoffish, then people treat you worse and maybe laugh at you, and then back to Rachel's point, actually drawing attention to yourself and saying that you're confused about something, and then the teacher saying, how on earth could you be confused about that, and humiliating you in front of the class, and all those million things that clients tell us about in their story. Autistic clients, I mean other people as well, but certainly autistic clients, I think, and again, I'd identify with that person. Our lives are full of those of those incidents, and as you say, real ones. Up to and including very serious bullying, of course, very, very chronic acute bullying,
and not just in school. We're talking about work as well, of course.
No, yeah. So if we move beyond the school part, then we're into the more adult experiences. Well, then I mean, it's something actually that I've just a few clients have been talking about this week is adulting. And the challenges for anyone of adulting, but again, the challenge is that you're kind of supposed to be able to do, and people might moan a bit about them, but they don't seem to find them as absolutely terrifying as some of us do. Growing up into adulthood as autistic people, the dealing with the practicalities of life and with the whatever, the bank, the boss, the neighbor, whatever it might be, I mean, again, people can have difficult experiences there, but I do think, there's a certain kind of, at least school was a little bit structured, and now I'm out in the adult world. I think that transition from school out into the adult world to college or work or whatever combination, to me, that's one of the really key pieces to work with. I love when I'm working with autistic clients at that age, just post school, because I do think that's the crucial transition, and there's massive amounts of anxiety.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, such changes and such different expectations and so on.
Yeah. And uncertain expectations. I mean, the best experience I've had was that I've been working with a couple of autistic youngsters who were just starting college. One was in their final year of school last year and just then started college in the autumn. The other had a go at starting college a few years back and then had dropped out for a couple of years and was starting into first year now, again on a different course. But in both cases, there was massive amounts of fear, and we did as much prepping as we could while making sense of it from an autistic person's point of view, and and enough and lots of validation, that's understandable, but also let's plan what we can plan and then see how it goes and help you through it. And both of them found that was really, really helpful, but that with that help, it wasn't as awful as they'd feared. But one of them had already had an awful experience without help, and I don't know what experience the other client would have had if they hadn't had that help. So after I saw them again, they were kind of saying, well, look, now looking back on the first term, it really has gone quite well, but it went well because we anticipated all the possible challenges and sources of anxiety and validated that it was okay to have those challenges as an autistic person, and okay to advocate for yourself, and okay to come and talk about it. Exactly. Again, back to Rachel's point, okay to be saying to somebody, I need help with this, and then hopefully you'll be okay.
I know. I think part of it as well is literally taking it seriously. I mean, talking about, that they're okay working from home, but going into the office is where they keep getting unstuck. In their industry, they have to work in very busy and noisy work environments where a lot of interaction is needed between the participants. And they look back over their lifetime and see the episodes of burnout and retraction from working occupational activities that are related to that, and so then they recover, start again, and so this is the situation of being there and saying to me, actually, describing a time of getting there, and then the quiet meeting room that they now know that they're allowed to request, which was agreed for them, was locked on arrival, and they couldn't find the person to get in there. It just went from bad to worse. It was a very terrible day for that person, and they collapsed in desperation, meltdown, you might say, but total collapse and defeat, and frustration and hurt and all the kinds of things. The point is this person was telling me this and wanting to know how they could get more resilient And it's actually about, hang on a moment, because they also were saying that they wanted to work, they had aspirations for their professional life and with that company, but they could see no option but to end up going off sick. They could just see that coming. And it's like, well, hang on, if we're talking this serious, then this has to be taken seriously, and so we have to start to think about, this is real. This is what you really need to be able to function over a sustained amount of time in this environment, and do all that you can to get it. We can't guarantee that you're going to get it. We don't know that, but certainly fight for it and take it seriously, that this is really serious, that this, you mean it when you say that you need it and you're entitled to it and you have to have it. Talk, maybe talking with the person had a meeting and about their aspirations and their pathway, including that. How will I be able to meet that? And how will I be able to show you I'm worthy of it while working from home? While not having to, instead of pretending, oh, well, I better go in the office then, otherwise they'll think I can't do it. They might think that, but let's try and clear it with them. Let's try and get that to be the reality, that this is what I need to function.
Yeah. And Luke Bearden has a very good book on autistic people and anxiety. But he says in it, look, I'm not a therapist. I'm not talking about sorting out what's inside in terms of your thinking and, your emotions and so on, as a therapist might do. What I'm here to say is that, a lot of the anxiety that autistic people feel is actually due to the environment, the real environment. And, as best as you can, you're going to need to learn to make choices around the environment, or ask for it to be changed, or you can advocate for yourself where you can. If you can't, well, yeah, maybe that will just be, be difficult, and there isn't always a solution. But his emphasis is very much on that side of it. Now, as therapists, we have the other part as well. But he's absolutely right, and that's a good example. Like sometimes it's just, I need some changes in the environment, and if I get those, if I can advocate for myself and using the law or persuasion or whatever, then that's what will make the biggest difference to the anxiety.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And some, when you were talking before about people not easily understanding or noticing when they're anxious, one of the things I've gotten into lately is taking more notice of like the mind-body connection, or even behavior. So I might say to myself, oh, Vauna, why did you do that? I'll ask that of myself. And then I can work it backwards. There's nothing wrong with doing it that way around. There's nothing wrong with seeing a way in which you behaved in a way that you're thinking, that, what's that about then? Why have I done it like that? And working it back. Why might I have done that? Could I be avoiding something? Why might I be avoiding something? Oh, maybe I'm finding it threatening. And working it back like that.
Oh, I'm a fan of that. And again, it brings us maybe to areas like, difficulty identifying emotions and alexithymia and so on, which we could come back to more again. But with anxiety, I would talk to clients about that sometimes, and say like sometimes the quickest way to figure out what you're feeling is to kind of deduce it from the context. It's almost like if you saw a movie character in this situation, what would you think they were feeling? Oh, anxious. Well, then probably you are, in other words, they've just
you don't have to know you feel it first. It's okay to spot it retrospectively.
You can figure it out sometimes, and like if you've just kind of sent somebody a message that's quite brave message, and they don't text you back, then well, what do you think somebody in a movie would feel if they just texted their girlfriend quite a brave, challenging message and they didn't hear back? They'd feel, maybe she hates me now for saying, and maybe I went too far, that kind of thing. And how would they feel? Anxious, like sometimes you can just deduce it. And so, I think that's a whole big area, is helping people then to name anxiety as anxiety, and learn to, then decide what we can do about it. And, I think we will be coming back to this next time to talk more about some of this, because the other aspect of that is that anxiety can then, if you think around about different contexts and so on, can be can be kind of broken down into some different types of anxiety that tend to occur in different contexts, like social anxiety, interpersonal anxiety is a particular type of anxiety where you're worried about what someone thinks about you. But that's quite different from, sort of the environmental anxiety of thinking, will it be very noisy, or phobic anxiety? Will people be walking dogs there? Or, the kind of worry that goes with, what if when they're off traveling, something happens to them and they get hurt, which is different from CD, so obviously I'm throwing all those out and probably we'll need to come back to some of them. But, a lot of them are common in autistic people and more common than in the general population. There's absolutely no doubt about that. By the way, I should throw in here that when I was saying earlier, anxiety is very pervasive in the autism community. That's different from saying that it's a symptom of autism, that it's a symptom of being autistic, which I think is a confusion some people have, that it's like, it's one of the features of autism. It isn't. If the world was more autism friendly, there'd be a lot less anxiety in autistic people. It's that the world isn't minority friendly,
Well, I think, and that's why people gravitate toward each other. That's why often you find that when you're late identified, that you think, oh, actually, I've married an autistic person. Fancy that. And neither of us knew we were autistic because we didn't feel anxious with each other. We felt that natural compatibility, that wasn't threatening. We were working from the same map, potentially, so those are the things, aren't they? So it's not about being autistic that we're anxious. It's like we're autistic in the interface of the socially constructed world.
Well, it's an interesting point because, at a certain point in my life, I found, for instance, after I got my degree in psychology, I didn't go and do postgrad work to become a psychologist. I worked with as a house parent to adults with intellectual disabilities, and I just found that a very safe environment, just very comfortable place for me to be. And then similarly, when I then did train when I went and got therapy myself in my late 20s, early 30s, and then trained as a therapist, I found the therapy world relatively, I mean, every world has its threats, but, relatively safe to me, a world where you could talk about things, and a world where people took that seriously and took feelings seriously. And to be honest, a world that was more, had a lot more women in it than men, because again, I'd grown up feeling inadequate in relation to other boys and men. So, it is very interesting how if we're lucky, we may find our way into worlds that just feel safer. But of course, some people aren't that lucky. I think I've been lucky, to be honest. Rachel is saying that some people find it helpful to have a checklist of likely factors to check in with. And I do think that that's, probably moving my mind towards what maybe we might continue with next time, which is that I think one of the most helpful things here is psychoeducation. It's the stuff we've just been talking about, learning what anxiety is, learning how to identify it, learning why you've got it, learning,
what it feels like in me or how it manifests.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All the details of that, plus the different names it can have, like, is it a social kind of anxiety or more a worry? Is it about what, sort of low self-esteem type of anxiety, or a more kind of phobic world, just doesn't feel safe anxiety, and, just getting some shape on it. I mean, getting shape on things works well for autistic people. So I think that I'm
wondering whether Rachel means it in terms of a checklist as in anxiety reducing. You may or may not mean it in that way, but I know that it certainly sparked my thoughts off then, that I use it as an anxiety reducing technique when I'm feeling very anxious. Often I will be thinking it's because I don't know what to do. There's so much to do. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do first. What if I do it wrong? What if I miss things out? And if I write the things down, okay, could it be this? Could it be this? Could it be this? And then of those things that are left over, that these are my real concerns, then I might do myself a checklist. Well, is it crucially, is it an emergency situation in this or this way? Are there things that are important that you need to go through? Can you work through them? Can you write it down? Some kind of structure in clear language, step by step, easy for me to follow, and it's written on a piece of paper.
I like that, approach as well. And I suppose as therapists, we certainly, with clients and also in a podcast like this, we need to say something about, well, yeah, okay, this is anxiety and this is where it comes from. This is what it looks like. And this is some of the ways you can help yourself. Obviously, but it's interesting because, I don't find my mind going there too quickly yet. And I tend to be like that in therapy as well. It's like, I often find like when clients are anxious, they often quickly want something to help it. And, I'll do that as well. If somebody's really,
just take the edge off it and contain it.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure.
We'll talk about breathing techniques or whatever. But to me, the only things that are really going to help in the end are really getting some understanding around it, some psychoeducation around it, some shape around it. And then we'll have a better idea what fit in terms of real kind of way forward and to manage it and reduce it and so on,
or live with it or not live with it,
exactly.
Make choices around it.
Choices and realistic choices and experiments to find out what works better,
quite.
So there's a lot in it. I'd say I've probably worked more with anxiety than any other issue except maybe addiction, because I worked as an addiction counselor for a number of years. But so I don't know whether I've caught up at this stage in terms of anxiety errors compared to addiction errors. But yeah, I think
every day that I see clients, there is at least one in, if not multiple people, where anxiety may not be the presenting thing that they're saying, this is what I'm here for, but it's there all the time and it raises up, and you just think, oh well, while I'm here, I'll just do this with this client on this bit, and then we'll get back to talk, because you have to contain the anxiety as well. If your arousal level goes way into the red, you're only feeling the heat. Do you know what I mean? And so you've got to get yourself back in the green to be able to think, to be able to cope, as well.
Yeah. And other times you have to raise anxiety because it's the only way forward.
Well, actually, that's a good point, because sometimes an avoidance could be an indication of anxiety that's so intolerable that one cannot experience it, and it just manifests as it not being you're not doing the thing or not engaging with it, because that's where it has to be.
Yeah, I mean, let's continue talking about this for another session or two, I think.
Yeah, okay.
Certainly one of the things I'd be interested in saying a little bit more about, because I do have some experience around it at this stage, is to talk a bit more about some of those particular kinds of anxiety, like compulsive worry and social interpersonal anxiety and phobia, and particularly with autistic clients of mine, because as we touched in this very briefly a few sessions back, there are differences. There's human stuff that applies to everybody, but there's also some differences, I think, in working with autistic people around some of these issues. So maybe we talk more about that next.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah.